So get this. We're diving deep today into some pretty wild source material for this deep dive.
Yeah.
You listeners sent in a transcript from a radio show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the whole thing was callers calling in describing their ideal partners.
Okay.
And let me tell you, they did not hold back.
Interesting.
So get ready to laugh,
Right.
but also get ready to think. Because
Right.
even in the most out there descriptions, we're going to find some really interesting stuff about cultural norms and perceptions and how people view relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so fascinating about this kind of source material is that it's so raw and unfiltered. It's like a
Yeah.
direct line into how people really think about desire and relationships. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. And it's like a little time capsule, too.
Absolutely.
Like a snapshot of a specific cultural moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing that really jumped out at me right away was how much people talked about height,
Really?
especially women describing their ideal man. Like there's this one quote that I just can't get out of my head. It says, "Women like tall men. The short man doesn't have a market for his audience."
Wow.
Like just straight up, right?
Yeah, no sugarcoating there.
No.
Yeah.
But it gets to the heart of this societal pressure around height.
Yeah, and it's not just about being tall. It's like this whole complex of ideas about masculinity and,
Right.
protection, even dominance.
Like a tall guy is going to be the provider.
Yeah, exactly. And, those ideas get reinforced by everything around us, movies, TV shows, even advertising,
Oh, totally.
So it's like this self-perpetuating cycle.
And then on the flip side, there was a ton of emphasis on women being petite,
Yeah.
like delicate hands and feet, all these descriptions focusing on smallness.
And that ties into a whole other set of cultural expectations about femininity, right? Like
Sure.
this pressure to be small and delicate and take up less space.
It's interesting, though, because some of the language people used to describe their preferences was very specific to Dominican culture.
Oh.
Like they use words like India, Trigania, Rubia.
And those terms are so loaded with meaning, right?
Yeah, like someone outside of that culture might not even understand what they're really saying.
Exactly. They're not just neutral descriptors. They carry all this historical and social baggage,
Oh, yeah.
reflecting the Dominican Republic's colonial past and its really complex racial hierarchy.
Right, so like the word India, for example,
Mhm.
that has roots in the Spanish caste system, which was all about categorizing people based on their perceived racial mixing.
Exactly.
So even something as simple as describing someone's appearance can reveal all these layers of cultural meaning.
Absolutely.
It's like a reminder that our perceptions of beauty are shaped by the specific context we live in.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder how much of what we think is like our personal preference is actually influenced by all these cultural narratives we've absorbed,
Right, like are we really choosing or are we just kind of following a script?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. Okay, so we have to talk about the elephant in the room.
Oh, what's that?
There's this part in the transcript where a caller specifically says he's attracted to very large women.
Okay.
Like he mentions 350 pounds specifically.
Wow.
Yeah, and it kind of sparked this debate on the show about fetishization versus personal preference.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really tricky area, right?
Oh, totally.
Because on the one hand, we want to respect people's individual preferences.
Of course.
But on the other hand, we have to be critical of preferences that are based on harmful stereotypes or power dynamics,
Right.
Like when a particular body type becomes fetishized, it often leads to objectification and dehumanization.
And I think humor can sometimes play a role in that too. You know,
That's
like there's this joke in the transcript about how the caller's friend would lose a pound every time he heard the word fat.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's meant to be funny, but it also shows how deeply ingrained these negative associations can be.
It's like we laugh, but it's also kind of messed up.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you think about all the times we might be perpetuating those stereotypes without even realizing it.
Yeah, it's definitely a good reminder to be more mindful of the language we use.
Absolutely. Okay, so remember that caller who compared his ideal woman to Irina, the famous volleyball player?
Oh, yeah, the one who is like intimidated by tall women.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because he's clearly attracted to her, but then also admits to being intimidated.
And I think that's something a lot of people can relate to, right?
Oh, totally right.
Like that conflict between what we're drawn to and then all these societal expectations or personal insecurities that get in the way.
Yeah, like haven't we all been attracted to someone who doesn't fit our usual type and then wondered why?
All the time.
And it makes you realize that attraction is way more complex than just having a type,
Totally. It's fluid, it's constantly evolving, and it's influenced by so many factors.
Okay, all right, we got to talk about this guy.
Ooh.
the one who broke up with his girlfriend because she cut her hair short without telling him.
Oh my God.
Like, what was that about?
Well, I mean, hair is a big deal in a lot of cultures, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Like long flowing hair is often associated with femininity and beauty and even youthfulness.
So maybe he felt like she was changing who she was.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he didn't even give her a chance to explain or anything. He just dumped her.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if he was more attached to like an image in his head than to the actual person, you know?
Totally. Like he had this idea of her, and then when she changed her appearance, it disrupted that whole image.
And that brings up this really interesting question for all of us. Like, how much of what we find attractive is actually about the other person?
Mm-hmm.
And how much is about projecting our own desires and needs onto them?
That's deep, man.
It is. And it's something we'll definitely keep unpacking as we dive deeper into this transcript.
I'm ready for more.
All right, let's do it.
I feel like we're constantly uncovering new layers with every single quote we pull from this transcript.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about, people stating their preferences. It's about trying to figure out the why.
The deeper meaning.
Exactly. Yeah, the cultural and personal stories behind those preferences.
And some of the descriptions are just so, like, vivid.
Oh, yeah.
Remember the guy who said he liked women who are chubby distributed?
Are you chubby distributed? That's such a specific way to put it.
It is,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's interesting because it kind of suggests he's trying to find a way to talk about liking a fuller figure.
Oh, yeah.
Like maybe he feels a little self-conscious or like he knows it's not the typical beauty standard, so he's trying to be playful about it.
Yeah, and maybe even pushing back against that standard a little bit,
Yeah.
like reclaiming the word chubby.
And there was another caller who said he liked women built like the subject of the platters,
Oh, yeah.
which immediately conjures up this image of like classic pinup art.
Totally. And it goes to show you how powerful those cultural images can be, Like,
Right.
we're surrounded by them constantly, and they seep into our subconscious whether we realize it or not.
It's true. I mean, think about your own social media feeds. It's like
Oh, my
a
God.
constant stream of images telling us what's beautiful.
And it's hard to know what we're absorbing consciously and what's just kind of getting lodged in there without us even realizing it.
Yeah. So how do we even begin to untangle all of that?
It's a process, right? But I think the first step is just being aware of it.
Okay. But back to the transcript. There was this whole debate about whether a preference for larger women crosses the line into fetishization.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is. It's a tough conversation to have.
It is, but it's an important one
Totally.
because we want to acknowledge and validate people's preferences, but we also have to recognize when those preferences might be rooted in harmful stereotypes.
And it's not always easy to tell the difference.
No, it's not.
And I think that's where open dialogue and critical thinking come in.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
we have to be willing to have these conversations even when they're uncomfortable.
Even when they challenge our own beliefs.
Exactly. And remember, those conversations aren't just theoretical,
Right.
They have real-world impacts on how people are treated and how they see themselves.
So hair was another big theme in the transcript.
Was it?
Yeah, like a lot of the men specifically mentioned wanting a woman with long hair.
Oh, interesting.
And of course, there was that story about the guy who broke up with his girlfriend because she cut her hair short without warning him.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
And I know we touched on this earlier, but I can't help but wonder if he was more attached to an image of her than to the actual person.
Yeah, it's like he had this idealized version of her in his mind, and when she changed her appearance, it shattered that illusion.
And it makes you think about all the ways we project our own fantasies and expectations onto our partners.
Yeah, like, are we really seeing them for who they are?
Or are we just seeing what we want to see?
Big questions, man. Big questions.
Okay, so what about the women?
What about them?
What were they looking for in a partner?
Well, a lot of them mentioned wanting a man who was tall and strong and well-dressed.
Okay, so those traditional masculine qualities.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting how those ideals persist even as gender roles are changing.
Right, it's like those deep-seated cultural narratives are hard to shake.
Totally. But I did notice that some of the women used more playful language to describe their ideal partners.
Like how?
Well, there was one woman who wanted someone muscular distributed.
Ah, yes, mirroring the chubby distributed comment.
Exactly. It's like she's poking fun at these hyper-specific body ideals.
And it shows that there's definitely a range of preferences even within a group.
Oh, absolutely.
And then there was a woman who wanted a man who was fresh and fresh.
Fresh and fresh. Now, what does that even mean?
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that one out.
It's so open to interpretation, right?
Yeah, it could be about appearance or hygiene or even just like a certain vibe.
Maybe it's like the opposite of stale.
Could be.
Who knows? But I love that she used that word because it highlights how hard it is to articulate something as elusive as attraction.
It really is. And speaking of elusive, remember the caller who said his ideal woman was Goldita repartida,
Oh, yeah, I remember that one vaguely.
which roughly translates to golden and distributed.
Okay, so kind of like glowing and curvy.
Yeah, and I think it's a great example of how, even within a single culture, there are so many different ways of talking about beauty.
And those perceptions are always shifting too,
Oh, yeah.
influenced by everything from media to social trends to personal experiences.
It's like this constantly evolving landscape.
Exactly, and it really challenges the idea that there's one universal standard of beauty.
Because there isn't.
Nope, attraction is way more fluid and complex than that.
Okay, so scent seemed to be a recurring theme for a lot of the women.
Really?
Yeah, there were tons of comments about wanting a man who smelled good.
Makes sense.
And one woman even said, "Give me color, give me fur, and please give me good fur."
Okay, that's a new one.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting because we often underestimate the role of scent in attraction.
It's true, though, like biologically speaking, scent can tell us a lot about a potential partner.
Right. It can signal health and hygiene and even genetic compatibility.
It's like our noses are giving us all these subconscious clues.
Wow, so we're basically walking around sniffing out our soulmates. And sometimes we develop preferences that seem to defy all logic.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Well, remember the caller who admitted to having a foot fetish?
Oh, right, yeah.
He even used the phrase, good intense proportions, to describe his ideal woman's feet.
Good, intense proportions. Okay, that's pretty specific.
It is, and it's a good reminder that attraction can be sparked by the most unexpected things.
Totally.
No.
And that everyone has their own unique quirks.
And those quirks are what make us interesting, right?
I think so. Diversity is the spice of life, as they say.
Okay, one last comment that really stuck with me.
Okay, hit me.
It was from the caller who said he liked women who were candidito, which roughly translates to lockable.
Lockable.
Yeah, I know it's an unusual way to put it,
It is.
but I think it actually reveals a lot about what he's looking for in a partner.
Like what?
Like it's a sense of security and stability.
Oh, yeah.
It's like he's saying, I want someone who's dependable, someone who's always going to be there.
It's actually kind of sweet when you think about it that way.
It is, and it speaks to those deeper emotional needs that often underlie our more superficial preferences.
Right, we're not just looking for someone who looks a certain way. We're looking for connection and intimacy and someone who makes us feel safe and loved.
And this transcript gives us such a raw and honest glimpse into that human search for connection.
It does. It's like a window into the heart.
Okay, so before we move on to the final part of this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said earlier
Oh, yeah. What's that?
about how this transcript is like a cultural snapshot in time.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder how these conversations about dating and relationships might be different today.
Oh, that's such a good question.
Right, because so much has changed.
Yeah, like think about the impact of social media and dating apps and all the conversations we're having now about gender and identity.
It would be really fascinating to see how those factors have shaped our perceptions of attractiveness.
Yeah, maybe we need to do a follow-up deep dive comparing this transcript to a more contemporary source.
I like where your head's at.
But for now, let's stick with this particular snapshot.
Let's do it.
You know, it's amazing how much we've uncovered just from this one radio show transcript.
I know, right?
It really shows you how much complexity there is to the human experience.
Totally. And how much language can reveal about what people are really thinking and feeling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of relationship preferences, what are your biggest takeaways?
Well, I think one of the most important things we've learned is that attraction isn't this like fixed formula.
Right.
It's way more dynamic than that.
It is. It's this constant interplay of personal experiences, cultural influences, and even subconscious biases.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so fascinating to explore.
For sure.
Like we all have these ideas about beauty and attractiveness, but where do those ideas come from?
Right.
Are they really ours, or are they shaped by all these external forces?
I mean, a lot of it is definitely shaped by the world around us,
Yeah.
media, family, friends, the culture we grew up in.
It's like we're all swimming in this sea of messages about what's desirable.
And it's hard to know what we're absorbing consciously and what's just kind of seeping in without us even realizing it.
So it's a constant process of unlearning and relearning.
It is, and it requires us to be really critical of those messages, especially in today's world where we're bombarded with images and ideals that are often totally unrealistic.
Absolutely. And I think this transcript also highlighted the importance of communication and open dialogue.
Mm.
Like even when the conversations get uncomfortable, even when people's preferences seem outlandish or clash with our own values,
Yeah.
it's so important to create space for those voices to be heard.
I agree, because those are the moments where real learning and growth can happen.
Right. It's like we can't shy away from the complexity of human desire.
Nope, we have to embrace it.
And let's not forget the role of humor in all of this.
Oh yeah, humor is a big one.
Throughout this transcript, we saw how humor can be used to deflect, to disarm, and even to challenge societal norms.
But it can also be used in harmful ways, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like to reinforce stereotypes or to mask deeper prejudices.
So it's about finding that balance,
Mhm.
between using humor to connect and using it to dismiss or invalidate.
Exactly, well said.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I have one final question for you, dear listener.
Okay, here.
If even something as seemingly superficial as describing our ideal partners can reveal so much about ourselves and the culture we live in,
Hmm.
what other everyday things might hold hidden depths?
Oh, I like that.
Like what seemingly mundane aspects of your life might offer surprising insights into your values, your beliefs, and even your subconscious desires?
It's a great question. It's an invitation to look closer, to listen more deeply, and to question the assumptions we often take for granted.
Exactly, because the world is full of hidden meanings just waiting to be discovered.
We just have to be willing to pay attention.
Beautifully put, and on that note, we encourage you to keep the conversation going.
Yes, please do.
Share your thoughts, your experiences, and any aha moments you had during this deep dive. We'd love to hear from you, and as always, thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery.